Hello guys, and in last video we discussed about the modularity of how Nestjs is structuring its folders and what's the advantage of doing it in this way, or as you could see in the screen. And today we are going to discuss about the controllers. So we will do an implementation of controller, and what a brief overview of what a controller is. You could think of a controller under the module as something that handles the requests from incoming clients. And the clients would be those who call the server API, be it from any client, whoever is asking, be it from the front end or you using Postman. It doesn't matter, anybody will be the client for the backend side of the server. So that's what controllers are. They're handling the request and respond anybody who is the client. So in order to register as a controller, in our case, basically we have to put an @ sign, @ controller sign for each classes that we register as a controller. And this @ sign basically registers as an endpoint for our API. So it could be, for example, /users, as you notice. So it will be registered as /users for because of the @ sign of controller. So any class that has this @ sign will become a controller, and in and as well we have to put it as a controller in the app module. See the root folder, the root file that is called the module. So in for today we will do an example, and we are going to do a manage users. So a user module, and the user module basically has it's a controller. So we are going to mainly discuss about the controller, and the controller would be it has a list of endpoints. So for example, we have /users, which is a get method, and it will be get list of users, get one user, so whereby we put the ID or the number after the slash. And we have create user, which would be a post method, and update one user, which will be a put method, and with the parameter which is /1. So basically update one user instead of getting updating all of the users. And we have remove, so it will be the delete representation. And if you have noticed that most of them are similar, but only the representation are the same. And this can be done in REST API. So if the representation are not conflicting, and then you could have the same endpoint. And yeah, for example, in this representation, since they are the same, we are able to change it. So we could say /users. So users get a list of users, and ID basically the number. So that's a different endpoint. That's why we are able to use a different representation, the same representation, but a different endpoint. So a different logic in this case. So let's get on the code. So this is our previous code. There's nothing much there, right? So let's create a folder which is called a user module. So here I'll create a folder under the source, and when you put a folder called users here, for example. Now in the users, so what I mentioned before, right, that any module that we have, the app module is really, the module class is really, module file is really important. So in this case, we will create a file called users module dot ts. So what do we do here? Similar to app.module, right, we will add here our class. So we'll call it export and say class. So we're exporting towards somewhere, and we'll call users module. And yeah, open curly braces and close for. We won't do anything here. And then to register a module, so you add an @ sign here and call it module, and we put in this way. Let me remove that. And now to import it, you call on the first line import, open curly braces, and call from, and you add @ sign in the Nestjs, and then if you hover on it, you will notice there's something called Nestjs common. So use that, because the common folder, common package will have the module at the decorator. So let's hover on it, let's just import it from here and say module. Now it is still giving an error because we have to add an object in the module sign. So we'll go towards the parameters. So let me give some space here. So open curly brace and close curly brace. And then here, what we want to have is, we won't do any similar to app.module where it has imports, controllers, and providers, because since we don't have providers and imports, we just want to think about the controllers. So what we'll do here is just say controllers. And since we don't have the class register, so we just say open bracket and close square bracket. Now let's create our controller, so to be registered in the user module. So create a file, and this file will be called users.controller.ts. And in here, so we'll create the class. So we'll just say export class, and then we'll call users controller, open curly braces and close curly braces. Now, to be registered, as I mentioned in the diagram, we have to add an @ sign on top of the class. So any class that has an @ sign will be called a controller, and this @ sign code decorator will be called controller. So let's say controller, and it is again coming from the Nestjs module. So let's just do it without IntelliSense, and let's put here our users. You could add a slash or without slash and call it users. So now let's import it, put it in the first line and mention import open curly braces, and then put that and mention Nestjs and comment. And then under here you'll just call controller, and we have it here. So now it has been registered as a controller, but the module doesn't know that this controller exists. So we have to go to back to our users.module file, and then we have to import our file, which is the controller, so the class. So it will be called, so open, and then we'll put in users controller here and say from, and we will import from the Nestjs, no, not Nestjs, my bad. We'll say dots, which is the current directory, and the file will be users.controller. And then after that, we will add it in the array. So this is an array, right? So we'll put users controller. If you notice, since it's an array, that means we assume that you could add a list of controllers. So that's why the name is controllers, and that's why it is an array. So we could add a list of controllers. So after registering, so now the users module knows that there is a controller, but we haven't finished yet, because if you notice the main.ts to run the server, what it does, it runs the app module, so the app.module file. So either we could create a users module and create here from there as well, but it will look ugly when you have different modules. What we usually do is we register the modules under the app.module, so the one that we initially get when we say initialize the Nestjs project. So how do we register that? If you notice, there is there is an object called imports, and that's where we want to import our module. If you don't have it, you could just create one. So like you just go to the open and curly braces and call imports, and then you add colon, open and close curly braces, square brackets. Now in here we'll import our module. So it will be import, and we'll call here, it's called users module, right? So we'll put it in here, and then we say from, and it is coming from users folder, so current directory, and say users, and then we will call users module. And then afterwards we copy paste this name into the imports. Now we have our users module registered under the app module, which will be run by the main.ts, and main.ts will recognize that the module is registered, and then as well the controller has been registered as an endpoint. So to verify that, let's run npm run start dev. So for development purposes, purposes, we will be using start colon def, but there are different cases where you could use start.def, start debug, and start production. So for our case, we will be using start colon def. Let's run it quickly, and when it has found 0 errors, so that's good. And then if you notice here, we have a line called routes resolver. So to notice if your endpoint or controller has been registered, so check on every routes resolver. So we have app controller, which is this app.controller, so it doesn't have any endpoint. But then if you notice route explorer, so it has a get method for the app controller. Now in the routes resolver for user controller, we have one, so it will be the endpoint of users. So we have registered an endpoint users for the user controller, but we don't have a get method yet. So what we have to do, so we'll continue with our controller. So let me close it here, and let me open the users controller. So this controller, so let's add an endpoint that we have mentioned in here, which will be a get a list of users, so it will be a get method. So let's call a method, and let's just use get users, open parentheses, close parentheses, and we have a get users. Now we don't have a class, a model for our users, but we will be doing that a bit later. For now, let's just test it out if the endpoint works. So what we'll do is return, and we'll return an empty array. Now, to be registered this method as an endpoint for our get method, what we have to do is go towards the line that we have imported the controller and add the comma, and we will have to add another decorator similar to controller get decorator. It will sound similar to the representation we have, which will be get. So this is the get method, so that's the get method that we are registering for the get user. So you will add an add sign, so which is the decorator, and you open and close there. Now either you could add a slash, right, or without it, and it doesn't matter because it's the root, so it will be registered as slash anyways. So if it's just if you have a special name, for example this way, then you have to mention it, and then it will be mentioned here user slash whatever. But for this instance, we are just using the root endpoint, which will be user, so without any string. And if you notice map slash users, we have a get method. Now we will go towards our browser, open localhost, and we'll say localhost 3000, and we'll call users and then slash. So in Firefox it'll showcase JSON, but we don't have anything. But in raw data, it will showcase open and curly braces, so it doesn't have anything. So if you have noticed, it is working fine. And if you put another endpoint, it will show that it's not finding. So if it shows this way, cannot get post, that means that something's wrong with it. So if you have problems with users and it shows the similar error that we have noticed in post or anything, then means that you haven't registered your endpoint yet. So again, just verify it from the users module. Look at carefully there where you have to add the users controller, and in the app module we have to register the user module itself. Now moving on, what we will do here is, instead of adding an empty array, let's create a model for our user. So let's create a folder, and this folder will be called entity, or you could call it model. So let's just call it here entity, and let's use user.entity.ts. And in this file, we'll create a class. That class will be called user, and then we open and close curly braces. Now, what do we want to have for our user? We'll be having a constructor, and that constructor will have, so what do we want to add it here? So let's just add our attributes here. So we will have first an email, right, and it will be private, should be private. Private. Okay, private, and then email. And no, I think no need. Right. No need to be specific. Okay, now email, and we'll have password, and let's add that, and then we will have as well is approved. So has it been approved? Just for the case of you could say this place whenever you create a user as a default, it will be not approved. So let's just say as a default value for is approved will be false, and admin is able to approve it when he approves the registration of the user. So let's say is approved password email. Okay, that's it. And in the constructor we'll have private. So we'll just add what was it? So email. So e string. We'll have pass string, and yeah, that will be it. And what we'll do is just map it out here. So e this dot password equals to pass, and yeah, that will be it. Okay, as a default it will be always false, right? So that will be it. Now what we want to do is we want to have a list of users. So let's create a list of users quickly. So say const and users equals to, so we'll add here open, and then we'll just call user, and we'll add here John at gmail.com, and Abdi at gmail.com. Oh yeah. Okay, that's the password. So I'll say 1 2 3 4. Really bad password. Per se, don't do that for any account that you have. So here I'll say Abdi at gmail. Oh yeah, Abdi at gmail.com. The password will be 1 2 3 4. So now we have a list of users, just 2 users, right? So it's okay. So we'll export that. So let's export this class as well, and let's format it. And you could say Alt Shift F, and it will format automatically. Now what's next is we will render or return this list of users. So we'll call here users. Let's import it first. So say import, and we will say it is coming from users. So we'll say users, and we'll say from entity, and the entity user entity, and we will import our class called user as well. Now we return a list of users. So let's test it out. So we'll go to our endpoint, say users, and here we go. We have a list of users, email, password, and is approved as well. Now what's next would be is getting one user, right? So let's I think let's create a user first. So let's add a new user in the list. So how do we do that? We'll add a post method. So a post method is coming from the Nestjs common. So we'll say post here, and we'll add open curly, and here we'll say create user and open curly braces. And then in the parameter, since we are requesting from the user, we'll say data, and then let's just call it any for now. Now what we could do is, in order to, since it's a request and response from the controller, so request and response, so we have to get the data from the body. Since in the post we always have a body, and then we have to get the request and response, so the request, the body of the request. How do we do that here? So it's not like Express where you could say request.body, but instead we will use, we can't do that, right? So but instead of doing that, what we could do here is we will add a parameter. So there's another decorator, so we'll use decorator, and it is called body. So in the body, what do we have to do with this body? We will add a parameter on before the variable that we have. So we'll call it add sign, and let's use body open and close parentheses, and then we have body. So let's test out what we have for the body. We'll say console.log. So what do we receive here? And let's just say data. So now let's open our Postman. So hopefully you have a Postman. You could use Postman or any kind of API that uses, right? So let's open. For my case, I tested out before. So you mention here HTTP localhost 3000/users, and you call it post method, or yeah, for specifically post method. So I think I'll create a new one. So I'll just say localhost and 3000 users, and then we will change the method to post, and we will click body, and then we will click row, and then we will just say JSON. So it will be type of JSON. We'll open curly brace, and then we will just add email. So the email will be valid@gmail.com, and then the password could be password, and we will say 123, yeah, J1234, it doesn't matter, right? Then we will send, and what do we see here in our conn log? We will say email and password. So as you notice, when we use the body, it will receive anything that we have. Even when you hover on it, it will tell you what the description of the request is, what the description of the body is. Even if you do post, it will describe you. So try to understand. So if you have more questions, you could hover on it and it will explain you what it does. So let's add that data towards a new user. So let's say, so what do we have to do here is we will say const user. So we'll just say new user, and then it will be new user, and within that one we will say data dot email and data dot password. We assume that it has data dot email and data dot password. We're not validating here. We just want to create something and understand how it works, right? So, and then we will do users dot push, and user dot push will put our new user here, right? And then we will return as well the new user we have, for the user to see that it has been added or not. Now let's go back to our Postman and send it, and you notice that it is responding to us because we have called return, and it has created our user and pushed it to our list of users. Now what will be next? Let's get on with get one user. So let's create that one. Let's use it from here. Let's say get user, and we will call that here open and curly braces. So the logic, we would understand it, but how do we do this dynamic endpoint? So in the slash, so let's think about it, right? So we have users, and then this one will be the ID, right? So it will be users 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, 7, 8. So we cannot just make an endpoint for each one, right? So we can just say so a get method, and then we cannot just say like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, because that would be dumb, and that would be a lot of code. And yeah, because we may have lots of users. Imagine we have thousands of users. How do we do that? So what do we do is we add a parameter for every method. So in Express you will notice that you have this something called colon and ID. So you could use that. So we'll use it here. So we'll use that colon and ID. This is the parameter. So we define this, anything that is coming from the slash, and 1, 2, 3 will be defined as a variable called ID. But how do we get that ID from the ID from this URL? And how do we do that is we will open this, we will use it similar to the body. We'll use a decorator, so we'll call it, it's called param. So simply put, parameters. So we will use that. We'll use at param in the open curly braces, and then we will define it as similar to what we have. which is colon ID. So we'll use that here. So ID, I'm searching for an ID, that's what it says, and define it as ID of type of string. I think no, it won't be a string, it will be a number. Let's just use a number. So it is coming from the parameter, and it will be defined as an ID, and then we get the ID in the parameters, and we'll call that ID as it will be a number. So what do we do with the number? Since we don't have an ID for each user, we will use it as the array. So we'll use it return, we'll call it return, and we'll say users, and then we'll just use the ID specifically as the index of the array. Yeah, simple as that, right? So we will open our postman. I think we don't need to use postman for this case, so we'll just use it here. We'll just say 1, and if you notice, it will give us our data. We'll use as well 0 because yeah, the array always starts with 0. But if we say 3, it doesn't have it, so it gives an error. So let's create several users. For this case, postman, let's just say send, right? We'll just send, and let's, for example, call it again. So 3, you notice it has 4, it has 5, we have it. 10, we don't have it, so we have to create one. Now next, since we have created our get a list of users, get one user, create a user, what you have to do is use put and delete. So it works similar to the get, which has a parameter, but instead of using get, it will be used as put and delete. So let's create those endpoints. So we'll put it here, we'll use put, and it is coming again from the Nestjs common module package, and we'll say update user and open, and then here open and curly braces, right? And in the body we'll add again similar here, body similar to our post. We'll use, because it is asking it's a different way of creating posts, but it's still asking for a body for put method. So we'll use data any, and we will ask in the put method as well a parameter which will be ID. So let's put a comma here, so it's a combination of post and get, right? So we'll use parameter here, we'll open it here, we'll call it ID string. Okay, now what do we do here is we'll say const user, and we'll say users, and it will be the ID of, oh yeah, it won't be string, sorry for that, it will be a number. So we'll put open and close curly brace, and then what we'll do here is we'll use user email equals to data email, we'll use user.password equals to data.password. Sure. What the next would be, we will say users and then ID, then we will say that equals to the user that we have changed. So we change the email password, then the index of the users will change it with the new updated user. So we'll say no, let's just have that, and then what we'll do is return the user that we have changed. That will be for put, but we won't test it out. We will test out with the delete method. So we use the delete representation here, similar to it's coming from Nestjs package. So we'll add that. Okay, mind you, mine is auto importing. So if it doesn't auto import, just add it from here. Just add append a comma and then add your decorators here. So we'll add it here, we'll say delete user, and we will call add parameter. So parameter, and let's say ID, and then ID number, close it, open and curly brace. So we closed it. Now what do we do here is we will find our user, so it will be const user equals to users, and we'll say ID. I think we have to do a different way of logic. I think what we have to do here is we have to remove that specific user. So how do we move it from the array? Oh, it will be a really complicated logic. I think for this video we won't do that, right? We'll just we'll just we'll just have that endpoint, and we'll just say uh, user has been removed, just for the case of simplicity, right? So all right. So we have a put, we have a delete and post and get. So now let's test out our put method. So for example, we will add a new endpoint here. Let me copy and paste this and call this. We will use the put method, and then we'll call body, and so we'll use it. The endpoint of this one would be 1, right? And then we call row, and then JSON. We open braces, curly braces, and then we will just add email. So email could be anything, that@gmail.com, and the password will be just be password. And now let's see what it was before, the list of users. So what was number 1? So it will be Abdi. So now it will change towards this ZY. So let's send it, and we have changed it. Let's test it out from here. So let's call the endpoint 1. So we will get ZY because we have changed it, right? So we have mutated the list with this user. So that will be put, which updates the user. Now where is user controller? Oh, yeah, user controller. Now we delete the method. Actually, we don't have anything there, so we'll just use it. We'll create another endpoint. We'll use this, and we'll add a delete method, and that will be 1. So we'll just call it, and user has been removed. So it's a status. We should have added logic, but for simplicity reasons, that's what we have now. All right. I think that will be it for our controller. Again, so this is the class. We have created an endpoint that will be users, and you will verify that from here. You will be able to see all the endpoints that you have registered, and it should be called Router Explorer. We have created our module that registers our user controller, and from the app.module we have registered our module, users module in itself. So in order for the main.ts to run the whole project. So I think that will be it for today's video. I hope that this would be quite helpful, and in the next video we'll talk about services and what's the advantages of having a service in our Nestjs project. Thank you very much, and have a good day.